never adopted. Now that's not to say, of course, that it would not have been powerful back in the day. Quite the contrary. Soon after its introduction in 1943, this brute was already well feared by German heavy tank commanders. Its ability to knock out even the most heavily armored German machines, including Tigers, King Tigers, and even the rare Yak Tigers, earned it the nickname Beast Killer together with its little brother, the ISU-152. While generally even a direct hit was unable to penetrate the thick armor of these German behemoths, the massive blast was enough to blow the turret of a Tiger clean off its hull. Even more devastating was the massive spall damage inflicted on the inside of the tank, combined with the tracking damage that pinned the enemy in place. This basically meant that even if some of the crew did survive the hits, they had to rapidly abandon their now immobilized machine. To make it even more difficult for the enemy, ISU-152s were quite often used in massed ambushes, when 4 or 5 of these beasts fired a devastating salvo at a single target's flank, pretty much guaranteeing the kill. Acting as heavy tank destroyers, however, was not actually their original role, even if they turned out to be quite capable in it. Their original role was in fact being part heavy artillery, part heavy assault gun. As an artillery support, they were actually somewhat limited with only 20 rounds of ammunition and a rather limited range. They did shine, however, as heavy assault guns, especially in city engagements like the ones in Berlin, Budapest or Königsberg. Their generally heavy and most importantly all-around armor meant that they could relatively safely advance into frontal positions even against the German anti-tank fire, and that 152mm howitzer was powerful enough to put an end to even the most heavily fortified enemy positions. They proved to be so effective that in fact they remained in service right up until the 70s, with a total of over 4,500 units produced, including all variants. So, finally a tank with some historical background, isn't it? But, history lessons over, I'm sure you are all itching now to see some numbers already. Well, today we will compare our subject with a selection of other Tier 8 non-turreted tank destroyers, like the T-28, the Yak Panther II, the AMX AX-48 or the AT-15. I have the numbers ready, so here we go. Let's not beat around the bush and have a look right away at how that monstrous BL-10, which is basically a Tier 10 gun, compared to its competition. Now, without question, it is simply unparalleled by its penetration and alpha damage at Tier 8. The Borsig comes closest being able to match the 750 average damage per shot, but it can only do so sacrificing the penetration, while at the same time the ISU-152 casually takes the first place there as well with a massive 268mm of average pen. Now this amount of penetration would even be comfortable in a Tier 10 machine, not to say at Tier 8. And this is exactly what the BL-10 is famous for. One-shotting a lot of tanks it will come across of, and that it will even make Tier 10s think twice about crossing its path. Now of course all this raw power has to be contained somewhere, and the secondary gun stats definitely act as a brake here. For example, while you have a very nice DPM of over 2600, you are far away from being on the top in this regard, with your limited rate of fire of only 3.5 rounds per minute, giving you an almost 17-second base reload. Your ammo capacity puts a hard cap on your damage output as well, though you mostly won't have to worry about your 20 ammunition limit because of your slowish nature. Speaking of slow, this thing has a monstrous aim time of over 3.2 seconds, and even fully aimed it has only a 0.39 meters dispersion that's far worse than what the competition has. And then we didn't even mention the other dispersion stats that are all quite bad. Just simply forget aiming at weak spots most of the time. You just point your gun at the largest flat surface and let your raw penetration power do its job. And the restrictions are still not over, I'm afraid. You have a rather slow shell velocity of 880 meters only, and that won't exactly help in hitting your targets either. The same goes for the only 6 degrees of gun depression and the only 16 degrees of gun arc as well. It's really a powerful gun then that lacks any kind of finesse and operates with brute force alone. You will have many misses or shots buried in the tracks of the enemies and sometimes bouncing off miraculously. But when it does penetrate, oh boy, all will be forgiven. Moving on swiftly to the protection, there is actually a significant health pool difference between the Tier A TDs, and the ISU-152 definitely gets the shittier end of the stick with just above 1000 HP. The armor isn't really much to behold either. It's actually one of the weakest amongst this competition. The only 90mm of armor plating in the front is very slightly angled, meaning that already 100mm of PEM will be able to get through it reliably. It's really only the gun mantlet that can bounce some shots, but there is plenty of almost flat surface all around it. The sides and rear are actually not that bad, at least not compared to the others, but it only looks good on paper mostly. The 90mm of side armor for one is between your tracks only, and the actual side of the superstructure has only 75mm of armor. The ass of the machine is covered with 60mm of armor plating only as well, so while it will annoy some lower tiered light tanks, that's about as much as it can do. And finally, your top is one giant weak spot with 30mm of armor only, so there is actually a really good chance that artillery will one-shot you if they will be able to land a shot on top. Looking at the mobility, things are looking up once again. Well, sort of. The top speed of 43 km per hour is actually quite nice, and even the power-to-weight ratio is alrightish with 14 horsepower per ton. On top of all this, the terrain resistances are actually pretty stellar, so you might even call this thing mobile. The Achilles heel of this machine here is really the traverse speed though. 21 degrees per sec is just pretty bad, and you will definitely struggle to point your gun at anything that comes close. As for the rest, it's actually an interesting mix. Camo is quite good actually, so that's definitely something that you can build on. View range and signal range on the other hand are one of the worst at this tier, so spotting for yourself might prove difficult. Now with all this in mind, equipment-wise the definite parts are a gun rammer and a gun laying drive for me. The third slot is a bit of a wild card though. Given the bad base U range of only 350 meters and the very slow traverse speed, and the good camo, I play this thing mostly as a support, and only went into assault gun mode at the end of the match. I was really relying on my team for spots, and so I opted for using vents to maximize my damage output. If you want to be less dependent on your team however, and also want to be more active, I could also see binoculars or optics work for you just fine. Crew skill wise, I would definitely prioritize camo over repairs once again due to my playstyle in it. As for the other priorities, 6 Sense and clutch braking should be really high on your list. Alright then, so what do we have here? Well, to sum it up, a devastating but slow and sometimes rather clumsy gun, badish armor, low health, decent mobility but bad hull traverse, and finally, quite good camo. For me this is definitely a backline support first, and assault gun only when the field has been thinned out already and all enemies are accounted for. If you allow someone to get near to you, you are dead meat. But if you play it smart in the end, it's extremely satisfying to roll up behind the remaining enemy tanks and blow them up one by one. Talking about satisfying feelings, I have here an Ace Tanker gameplay right away loaded for you with shitloads of damage, BL10 style. Check this out. Alright, so here we are riding the legendary Troll Cannon. This time around we gotten ourselves into an encounter match on good old Redshire. Now, the matchmaking is kinda interesting. First of all, there are a couple of tier 9s on both of the teams. But to be frank, I wouldn't actually mind having some tier 10s as well, cause, well, that only means for the BL10 that there is more HP on the enemy team that it can take away. Also, the positioning of the team is, well, kinda frightening in the beginning, cause the lemming train towards the east would be kinda alright if the enemy team would not have the medium tank advantage, so I was kinda expecting there a very heavy enemy push on the 1 and 2 lines, where most of our team will be pushing the 9 and 0 lines on the other side of the map. So we definitely will have to keep an eye on the map, not to get bomb rushed right in the beginning. Now I have to say that this won't be one of the most mobile of matches, and well, Brian Patton, take it easy, man. So this won't be one of the most mobile matches, and that's because this position right here is so damn powerful that if you have some spots on all those tanks approaching the typical heavy engagement zone, well, you can do massive amounts of damage while remaining relatively safe. Now that previously was a bounce from the back of the E-50's turret, lucky bastard, and then a complete miss on the Black Bulldog. It wasn't really a good shot, but then again it didn't even go close to where we aimed it, so I guess that's the BL-10 for you. But we really shouldn't feel too sorry for ourselves, there are still plenty of targets here. That E-50 looks very good, and oh my god, look at that, 730 damage, which is actually slightly below average, if you would believe that. But what's that? T-rate medium tank on full health? Not anymore! And that was actually a low damage roll. This gun is just absolutely unforgiving, just tearing apart the same tier, and also higher tier opposition. We don't really have a good shot at the Pershing. The Black Bulldog, however, that looks a little bit better, and we loop that shell in. Another low damage roll, but I mean, we can't really complain about close to 700 damage per shot, can we? Question is, can we two-shot the Pershing? Come on. Yes, we can. And there goes a T-rate medium tank back to the garage in just 2 shots. Now we have to say that basically we have been really lucky here. The Lemming train did win the east, and that was never really a question. The good thing was, however, that we were not rushed on the west by the enemy mediums. Speaking about mediums, look at that snapshot. BL-10 for the win, and this time around with a above average damage roll of 836 damage. And that T-44 was hit so badly that he just basically gives up the match. I don't know what he was doing, his tracks were already repaired, but he didn't really move, so I guess thank you for the extra kill. Now that's one tasty looking AMX CDC on the other side. Would be great to have a nice shot into him, and that was a really bad shot. So that's kinda unfortunate. You have to say that how annoying it is when you miss these shots. You have a really long reload, and your shots have just so much potential that when they miss, it can be really frustrating. AMX coming up. Come on, one more shot please. Nah, won't happen. And he's on very low health anyway. We want to shoot juicier targets than that. Lucky for us, there are still plenty of enemies left on the on high health, which we can basically feast on. That said, there are some really dangerous opponents there, including an enemy ISU-152 and a tier 9 Skoda T-50. So let's play it a little bit more cautiously. Would be really a shame to throw this one away. We are already on 4000 damage. Oh, what do we have here? TVP, preoccupied with the targets he sees. Let's say hi. Hello. There goes your health. Absolutely crazy. Oh, but what do we have here? Hello, little